Hello, I'm Malicious. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here to bring you some information from my perspective on the New World beta, going to add my thoughts and general experiences as we go along. This video took a long time originally because I included everything and it was incredibly long, but luckily it's shorter now, and without much further ado, let's get into it. I want to start off by talking about the design of the game, all the little aspects from graphics to audio that make the game what it is. The game is super immersive. I have to say right off the bat that the sound design is a 10 out of 10. By far the best sound design I've seen in an MMORPG. I can pinpoint the sounds people make, hear echoes from rocks being smacked and it echoing off of cliff sides nearby, and the sound design is dynamic. It fits the area you're in and a lot more other things like that. Super realistic, highly immersive, and as a person who really appreciates this and loves using their ears in any game they play, I have to say I was blown away. It was an immersive ASMR experience. There doesn't seem to be a constant recycling of sounds that don't fit. The muskets sound satisfying, the rocks sound great, the trees when you're cutting them down, even the gathering, running over grass, swinging a weapon, walking on wood versus walking on grass or mud. It makes a massive distinction between the areas that feel alive and those that feel more peaceful or empty or even dead at times. Now I've highlighted a few clips for you to judge for yourselves, so have a listen to the sound design, and I will mention that this is going to apply throughout the game. It's going to apply when somebody runs past you, runs towards you. If you're expecting a PvP ambush, you can hear their footsteps coming unless they play it stealthily. You can see these kinds of things happening, and usually we see these things in FPSs and such, but yeah, in this game it's very strong, and yeah, just take a listen. The game is also beautifully designed, detailed graphically. There's so many little differences between the ores, the trees, the scenery, and the game is honestly beautiful. Combined with the immersive sounds of players doing things around you and a combination of subtly beautiful and effective music, New World is well designed when it comes to audio and visuals, to the point where I can't really pick out too much here that's horrible. Now that's not the only thing that can make the world feel alive either. Of course, in this game they've decided to implement proximity chat, and that's wonderful to see. Walk past conversations of people trolling each other or something is to be expected, but it really gives the game a unique charm, beauty, voices, sounds, all in a great package. A few other interesting design choices is that there are menus for other things as well, where players can choose their pronouns, for example, of those what they want and what to be called. The game is definitely quite progressive in that extent. Character creation allows you to do a lot to your character as well, from hair, facial hair, there isn't really a huge limit on that. You can be a female character with facial hair and vice versa, and a lot of other things. Of course, it can be improved, but it does currently include a lot of diversity and options for people from all walks of life. There is also a speech to text option that puts the text in the chat that people are talking about. It's pretty inaccurate though if you have an accent. Of course, I played on the EU version, so it wasn't entirely perfect. It does, however, also translate languages to your chosen language, I believe. There's also a text-to-speech option where every line of text typed in any enabled chat is spoken back to you, and we love to see that kind of diversity. There's other small options as well, previously unseen in games, Twitch options also that identify you as a streamer and how many people are watching you next to your name, just to name a few of those things. Some of these systems function great, others work horribly and could definitely use tweaking, but it's good to mention them and know that they are part of the game. Also, it's worth mentioning that the HUD is relatively clean and functional instead of cluttered, which I definitely like. It's not exactly the most minimalist HUD available, let me just highlight that now before anybody jumps down my throat. Especially, some people might find it very cluttered when the more quests you take, but it's nothing like an old cluttered HUD of older MMORPGs, and I'd say it's a nice middle ground. I would love to see some level of customization available from players to be able to change the HUD into either something more cluttered or more minimalistic, or keep it somewhat close, but some customization wouldn't go amiss. So, story-wise, the game doesn't have the most interesting or high fantasy story I've seen. Maybe because the stories that appeal to me are more on the nose fantasy, like Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft, Lord of the Rings style fantasy. Perhaps that's why I cannot personally get into it as much. But as for the quests in general, let's start with the good. The good thing about questing is that there's a lot of variety available for players to choose from gathering, refining, crafting quests to killing random mobs, searching random boxes. After a while, things to do get a little stagnant, but you're allowed to pick and choose whichever quests you feel like doing at the time, not including the main story quests. Apparently, there is plenty of variety in the game also, and lore, and I can only really judge this when faced with the entire story and doing a lore deep dive, but that's a whole different video in itself. I can say, however, during the beta that some of the quests that were vastly better than others were the town board quests, and they have currently been nerfed several times over and are still some of the best quests for the fastest experience to do. I've done quite a few of each quest type I could find, and it does change the pace a little, from fighting to dungeon questing to gathering specific things to fishing special fish. It's definitely not the most extensive or fun system, but I praise the variety. The quests beside that didn't leave a huge lasting impression. I think some of them should be tweaked or changed to give more experience, or some less experience, like the town quests and stuff like that. And I mean, they have, of course, but there could still be some fine-tuning done there. Some of them were quite buggy as well, giving you the incorrect markers or having mobs that took an absurd amount of time to spawn, and that would basically rip you out of the immersive experience and put you in a waiting game as you waited for whatever mob or boss to spawn and for you to have the opportunity to tag it. Now combine that with the fact that you have to walk everywhere at slow speeds, unless you use a resource known as Azoth to fast travel, and you have a formula for people complaining about the perceived forced slow pace to moving around the map. Combat in New World is rather simple to understand. You get 3 abilities per weapon and a few passives you can invest points into, as well as most weapons having a heavy attack and a light attack combo. Sometimes just a pure light attack if we're talking about ranged weapons like muskets, but for example, bows' heavy attack comes from drawing the bow long enough. There's also other little interesting nuances to the weapons like positioning, style, general damage, and appeal. You also by default carry 2 weapon sets of your choice to switch between. All your abilities are action based, and although there is some room for certain weapons to have partial tap target style abilities, most of everything is free aim, including muskets, melee weapons, bows, and so on. Now, the combat in New World when it comes from a PvE or dungeon-based perspective is that it's relatively good, although parts of it lack a certain clear style or soul in a way. It does remind me of games like Dark Souls, where the individual skill is what carries the player through certain encounters. That's mostly true for New World also. You can't just autopilot and spam left click on every single mob because you'll want to block some of the incoming damage to avoid constantly using health potions or recovery food. That being said, the game is nowhere near as difficult as Dark Souls per encounter, and it's not as exactly always a brain dead grind either, and I think that's cool. Having the ability to dodge or block or mitigate damage, and how light, medium, and heavy armor interacts with your defensive and offensive capabilities, whether that's a slow dodge and increased block stability for heavy armor, or a dodge roll for light armor and increased damage, is a fresh and cool new kind of way to see MMORPGs, which once again reminds me of Dark Souls, the whole fast rolling versus slow rolling. This simplistic style that requires some skill to pull off in certain situations, which also means that most mobs higher level than you will not wipe the floor with you unless there's a severe difference in level. Now, because of that, if you play your character correctly, you should be able to take on monsters maybe 5 levels or whatever higher than you without too much of an issue, which I guess in some other games is kind of way too difficult because there's always set damage that you take, or certain abilities that you can dodge but you always take a bit of damage, and New World is no huge exception to that, but there's still room for stuff like that to actually happen. That doesn't mean the passives or skills you choose for your weapons are extremely shallow. For example, for each weapon you have the set of, there's 2 trees that focus on something. For the sword and shield, there's a tree focused on shield mastering and one focused on sword mastering and damage, and it's up to you where you put your points and which abilities you get. You can spec into both a little bit here and there, but the weapons that you get and the keystone that you get at the end is only locked onto 1 keystone per weapon, whichever side you decide to go on entirely. The weapons level up as you defeat monsters using them, of course, and this adds some extra flavor, but it doesn't make it as in-depth as many other weapon systems across the MMORPG genre, considering many of those MMORPGs actually have set class and set class identities, and New World does not. In fact, the game lets you reset your points, use any weapon, and put points wherever you wish. Now, that can be a positive or a negative depending on what kind of gamer you are. I'd call this a positive, but I'd call the lack of class identity and variety a negative. But since many weapons people assume will come to the game are not actually available in the closed beta, for example Greatsword, we can't talk about how the game will feel as a whole package yet. However, what we can do is talk about the weapon balance real quick, and this will tie into the combat system effect in PvP. Currently in New World, there's a handful of weapons that feel extremely powerful and a few that feel like absolute trash. Now, if you played the beta, you'd know what I'm talking about. For instance, the hatchet and the great axe were very big favorites and felt really powerful, especially in PvP. Some weapons definitely need looking at or adjusting, but I assume that this will be a balancing thing and shouldn't be a massive concern unless they really mess up somewhere along the way. Also, it's worth mentioning, side note, that the amount of streamers and YouTubers that have been complaining about PvP balance beyond the things that already mentioned by the community, some, not all streamers and YouTubers, were fed insane amounts of materials and power leveled by their communities without investing many points into their weapon skills at all, yet they complained that their weapon sucks. So if you've heard those rumors around, ask the person complaining what their level on that weapon really was. That's all I have to say on the matter. I didn't have a community feeding me materials or power leveling me, and I tested weapons out for myself, and I could definitely see even in PvP that there was a difference between some weapons and others. Some was based on level, some was based on the actual strength of the weapon itself. Now, I gave them specific chances and tried them in specific instances also. Some do actually feel more powerful than others, but once again, it's going to be a case-by-case basis here for the balance team to tackle. I'm going to listen to someone who has a higher level in their weapon constantly PvPing rather than somebody who has PvP'd a few times after being fed materials and has maybe level 2 on a great axe and decides to call it a horrible weapon. That's basic logic, that's basic understanding. I don't know how many people I just called out, to be honest with you, but yeah, don't come for me over that one. What is a concern, however, is variety when it comes to stats and weapons. For instance, if you want to be a pure intelligence user, you're locked into a few weapons and it sort of diminishes the character's fantasy style for some players. For me personally, I'm going to want to run what feels best as my main weapon, then build around that. If that means I use a bow or a musket with a greatsword without gimping myself, then so be it. If I can't, and I actually do have to gimp myself, then I'll probably find an alternative to that. But a lot of players are currently running one melee, one ranged, until the Grey Axe Fiesta, of course, and the Hatchet Fiesta and the Hammer Fiesta, to where many turn to Great Axe Hammer and Brute Force in PvP. Now, the combat system, although feeling relatively good in certain PvE aspects, there is some clunkiness, like mobs being able to shove you into walls, which is a horrible experience, especially when I was tanking dungeons. The combat system becomes much more problematic in a PvP setup. PvP feels clunkier. There's a lot of weapon bugs as well out there, as well as weapon balancing issues. Healing is extremely strong and doesn't seem to have a limit. 1 versus 1 battles or even 3 versus 1 battles feel like a fumble fest. It feels like I have much less tools than many MMORPGs that focus on PvP have. Games like Black Desert Online or Guild Wars 2 or even Elder Scrolls Online feel like they give me enough tools for me to maneuver, outplay several opponents at once with this whole roaming style or play style that involves that kind of stuff. And that only really happens if I play optimally. But once again, those games have classes and identities as well as balancing issues quite often. In New World, although this is possible at times from my experience, it does rely a lot on your weapon choice as well. It feels like sort of fighting is much more restricted. For instance, I've seen many staff users complain that once they are in a melee battle, there is no real getting away or dodging out of combat in certain situations. Some of that may come down to their weapon choice, of course, but it definitely feels like 3 players can chase you down and your only real option is to come up with a quick plan and hope they fall to the area of effect and crowd controls that you can put out, or getting run down and DPS'd while meleeing each other non-stop. Outplay potential becomes more likely when playing smart and using ranged weapons in situations where the enemies are pure melee, but once again your tools to outplay aren't always the best, not to mention the games I've mentioned above. Have some serious focus on chase abilities or crowd control abilities, strong movements and dodges, invincibility frames, stealth, and other tools, as well as combos that make combat and PvP setup much more meaningful and impactful. At least it feels that way off of the get-go. New World does not have a single rogue or stealth-like class, for instance, currently, and a few other archetypes that are missing. Now, the PvP does feel skill-based, but of course, it's skill-based with the tools that you are given. You can kill players twice your level, or you can get killed by somebody half your level. It feels like an equal playing field to the untrained eye, but I still assume being higher level will still have an impact. I've heard conflicting reports about how PvP scaling is perfect, and after some testing, there's still room for improvement there. However, the bigger issue is that there is really no massive incentive to PvP, at least open world PvP, especially not at max level. There's nothing you can really gain or lose, or overall it just doesn't really feel too meaningful to the grand scheme of the game. The PvP combat in the game won't be like many MMORPGs if you're looking for chase skills, flashy, multiple skill combos, and long meaningful crowd control chains like some of the other games I've mentioned. This PvP system will not resonate with that, but if you prefer action-based and skill-based combat that feels a little clunky and has less options, but allows you for pure free aiming and a few other possibilities, the PvP should resonate with you. I assume there will be some changes to that, of course, with the delays of New World releasing happening once again, so the game is expecting to come out by the 28th of September, Now I really hope they do look into open world PvP incentives during that time. Also, on a side note, I did mention that there were rogue classes that were missing or having certain combinations of weapons that don't really fit. For example, my friend wanted to use a ranged weapon and something else that was magical and couldn't really find something specific there. But what I can say about that is that they are adding newer weapons as far as I can tell, and there will be a section at the end of the video talking about the data mined items in the thoughts section. So look towards that if you want to know what data mined items that could be in the game in the future. When it comes to crafting, gathering, and refining in this game, I don't really have much of a bad thing to say. From the minute I started gathering and crafting, the amount of resources allocated across the map, from mining to logging to skinning and so much more, I had plenty of fun even just cutting down trees. Usually, I'm not the person that enjoys crafting or gathering systems in most MMORPGs, simply because there seems to be this huge divide between the crafting and gathering aspect and the PvE and PvP portion of the game. But luckily, in New World, not only is the system relatively fun and interesting, but it's a seamless transition from gathering a few items to going right back to a quest, provided you have inventory weight limit, I guess. I don't need anything more than that, and my gathering tools and a correct refining tier or crafting tier working table, and not much else from there. I don't have to commit to gathering and crafting before I leave the town, and I love that. The little addition to tracking certain items or getting rare loot is fun. There's also a sense of accomplishment in what I make and how I make it, as well as leveling up to the next tier of things available to me. It feels almost like an updated RuneScape. No need for an extra gathering set or meaningless gathering skill or this system that divides the game into those portions, just good old-fashioned looting and leaving. Or searching particular areas, finding the best grounds for certain materials, or previously unknown clearings of bountiful materials, and honestly, it's super fun to me. There's also mobs in the game that give you gathering items when you loot their bodies, like stone bears and other things, which is a fun combination of gathering and grinding or questing. The crafting system isn't the most extensive or intricate crafting system I've seen, but it's not shallow or without substance either. Definitely a big part of the game, and I do believe some of the better gear will be crafted. That being said, I don't know how crafting will hold up in the long run once everyone has really crafted out their gear. I don't think there will be much of a need for crafting unless they implement items like legendaries that require the crafting profession to be upgraded or updated, or low drop rate chance items littered around the world that can be combined into a powerful weapon, armor, or other pieces of gear. Things like that will take regular updating, and looking over it might be a slight concern depending on what they do to that system in general. Fishing is much better than most MMORPGs, but I still think it doesn't really hold a candle to the fishing system of Arcade, which in my opinion was legendary. But as a basic system, fishing is good in this game. It requires little attention to detail, but not entirely AFKing, with differences between saltwater and freshwater and hotspots and a few other things. New World started as a full loot PvP survival game, by the way, and has since become an MMORPG. The one thing that shows the game's survival roots is the gathering system. It reminds me of older MMORPGs like old school RuneScape and Albion, where there's an abundance of materials littered around the map for you to stumble upon and make mental notes about and come back to later, where some resources are more rare than others in certain areas, and many more things like that. It's refreshing to see this kind of crafting and gathering system, and I really commend them on this. This system in New World really does give off the game, and it gives off an additional flavor to the game in general, and makes a non-crafter like me actually interested in crafting and gathering for once. I just hope it's managed correctly and remains a really cool part of the game that doesn't see eventual irrelevance as time progresses. Now, onto my thoughts, suggestions, and whether this game will be ready by the time it's released. Now, if the release was still going to be the 31st of August, my first answer would have been that the game is completely undercooked, in a degree or either one way or another, and I think it needed more time in the oven. Now, they have delayed the game luckily, so New World as a game has been an experience. Not a bad one either. I have my problems with the game for sure, and we'll get into those. But some of the pluses I talked about, including the sound and graphical design, the amount of care placed in design, crafting, and gathering, has a huge positive with me at least. With Amazon money behind the game, however, it is to be expected, but I can't help but wonder how well the game will hold up. I want to mention there is a lot more I've done in the game and not talked about, but this video is already long enough, and if we require something more in-depth in the future, I'll happily talk about it. But to stay on point, one of the biggest issues people notice immediately is the need to basically go cross-country to do certain quests. The amount of walking around can be tiresome and boring. However, the game has so much going on when it comes to scenery, ability to gather, things that I feel like if you didn't walk around as much, you would miss small discoveries around the world, like sort of events. The thing about that is players shouldn't feel forced either. Many people have called for mounts, but there's plenty of ways of fixing this without using mounts. Increasing movement speed, for example, allowing stamina to be used to sprint when going from place to place, or increasing the Azoth cap for fast travel, or even reducing the travel costs. I know part of that plays into a whole system of having multiple towns for storage and hubs and such, but it can be extremely tedious for getting an item or moving from place to place for another or a little tiny bit of gain. Immediately players notice that movement is an issue that should probably be addressed, but I advise it not be done in an insanely drastic way to keep the essence of the game intact. A big thing to also note in this game, it will not appeal to everyone in the MMO community, and that's fact. Considering the level of reach and content and how aimless the game appeared a few months ago, currently has a direction. It's not perfect, there seems to be a large part of the game that is dysfunctional or counterintuitive, and they have spent a lot of time changing things from being full loot PvP, started off as survival, now they're adding PvE and a bunch of other things that just keep adding and adjusting in the game. And then there's going to be people that argue that they love running around and others that will be absolutely bored without mounts. It's going to be one of those instant gratification issues also. They shouldn't try to cater to everyone though. Some people prefer class identity, Korean style flashy MMORPG skills and tons of skills and many different things, but they won't really enjoy this game if that's all they're looking for. Economic health can also be worrying later down the line if crafting becomes obsolete. It's also worth mentioning that crafting will always come down to supply and demand. So I hope they keep releasing items or keep crafting interesting with things like legendaries or lucrative ways that keep cycling into economic health. I love how crafting just feeds into refining and gathering. Certain things feed into certain professions, and it just makes me want to craft more things or search how certain things can be done and learn this whole experience of going past the surface level and discovering a new fresh experience to delve into. I wish I could say that with more same things like weapon mastery, but that is not the case. I also should mention that getting certain items required for certain crafting materials and certain other things, provision chests are essential for that and can severely slow down one's progression when it comes to crafting, which can be insanely irritating. I hope to see other ways to get these items like sand flux and whatever else is needed from these specific boxes in the future, not just running around trying to gather chests that take insane amounts of time to spawn. Additionally, a negative thing is also things like Fey Iron. What's the deal with that drop rate, man? They took me forever to get an item that was low level and would skip over rather quickly just to get a bunch of Fey Iron. I actually got to mining over 100 before I could get any Fey Iron, and even still then I was using buff food at a certain point from around 70 plus and I still wasn't getting any Fey Iron, and that is a pretty low level item. It seems like an oversight, to be honest with you, but unless they plan on making higher levels, make lower level weapons for sale and not much else, then that just seems odd to me. Many things need to be addressed as well, including weapon style, PvP incentive, and much more. The game was quite easy and engaging at the start, and just kept adding a bit more at a time. I think New World has some real potential to stay in the market and actually create some noise and be a hit of some kind if they play their cards correctly. Now they've delayed the game even longer. They have a lot of time to work on it. I assume that it's not going to be changed way too much, and it does feel a bit undercooked. I believe with the correct care, the game can go uphill. With the wrong feedback, however, the game could become a shell of what could have been a successful game. However, it doesn't entirely feel like a AAA game either. Involving Amazon and all this money, it feels a little missing, like something is missing or something doesn't fit correctly, like some of the pieces aren't exactly in the right places yet. People have been data mining recently as well, and there's a few things hidden in the files that may or may not create an appearance in the game in the future, including weapons like maces, daggers, war clubs, polearms, two-handed longswords, pistols, crossbows, void gauntlets, earth staffs, torches, and quivers also. There's also a lot hidden in the files that we do not see in the beta, and it makes me wonder just how different the variety could have been with those included. However, for a game that's a one-time purchase of $40, the game is relatively good, although as mentioned, portions feel incredibly undercooked. It's a different style of MMORPG, no super flashy moves or epic abilities that make you feel like you're a walking god. You're just some person in a world doing the same thing that everybody else is doing with a different weapon or whatever you're using. Also, a small nitpick here, some of the housing furnishing items and cosmetics seem so unbelievably ugly. There's a beauty in the game for sure, but I've never been one for the 17th century aesthetic. But I also don't think multicolored lions fit in the world as a housing pet either. That's for you guys to decide though, and pay with your wallet or not, it'll be cosmetic. Bear in mind there will be microtransactions in the future, cosmetics only at least until 2022. Time will tell what else will be placed in there. They did mention their goal is to make something in the store that wasn't completely anything that wasn't cosmetic obtainable in the game in the future, but we know their plans will only really be unveiled after 2022 when it comes to that sort of thing. Also, any of you FF14 or WoW players that enjoy big raids and progression PvE gameplay, I'd hold off of purchasing if I were you if that's your main concern in the game. The game doesn't really have any of that yet, and I'm not sure how they will implement that, especially with the style of combat they've gone for. WoW War FF style raids would not fit in this game at all, and would only cause chaos with the movement style, collision, combat style, and a few other things if we're talking the same amount of players, like the 16 plus, 20 plus, whatever. There's another way that I wasn't really able to experience some of the things, and some factors that I weren't really able to experience. And it's how well the game is going to do over time when it comes to the end game loop, and that is a dreaded fact. If PvP isn't changed much and there isn't much of an incentive and the end game loop is, well, shallow, it's going to be a sad day, and the game will become one of those that you play whenever new content is available. But if Amazon Game Studios manages to nail the end game loop, well, the game might just have a top tier contender with the other MMORPGs on the market today. I do have to leave you with one piece of wisdom, however. Not every game is made to cater for everybody's tastes. Look at the MMORPG market. Look at how many loyal players love certain MMORPGs and others cannot stand those same MMORPGs. Sometimes those games really do suck for the majority, but they provide a certain experience or flavor for some players that they do not find anywhere else. I think it's important to understand that. Is New World going to be an MMORPG that you enjoy from now on? Now, I also have to say that, is it going to be the same for me? I don't know, only time will tell. I'm still a lover of flashy, fast-paced, and deep combat mechanics. I loved games like Guild Wars, Aeon, Rohan, Aka, Arcade, and a few other PvP-heavy MMORPGs with class identities and clear outlines for me to explore, but a game that has a whole package is a rare treat, and I've only played a few of those. Regardless, New World feels like a game that is 100% going to draw a crowd to it. For how long is the question, as well as how good the end product will be. I came in with no expectations and was pleasantly surprised, but still felt underwhelmed in certain areas. There's a few oversights for sure, that I discussed in the video. There's bugs and exploits, as well as server stability issues also, which I assume influence the delays. If those are fixed, then it would be good. Also, I severely doubt the game will change too much within a month or two delay. Also, not too sure how many delays this game can take before it hurts the overall reputation of the game as well. So yeah, I look forward to making more content on this game in the future if it holds my attention, but for now, I thank you for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell to never miss a video. I do indeed have a Discord as well for those of you that want to join and build a community or just talk and hang out. If you enjoyed the content or watch any of my other videos, and a special thanks and a shout out to nightvision_ off of Twitch, who managed to come in clutch and give me the key for the New World beta. Going to drop his Twitch link in the description down below, as well as a friend of mine who also plans on making the game his main streaming game in the future, Cup of Coffee. His link will also be in the description down below, as well as my own Twitch link as well. And I'm also working on something really fucking exciting behind the scenes before I get back to streaming, so keep an eye out for that. It will be hilarious, but as always, I've been malicious, and this has been a pleasure.